This is Starting Point, a podcast that tracks Guyana's unprecedented growth from all vantage points. Join your hosts, Kiana Wilberg and Fariza Hanif, as they dive deep into the heart of topical issues.
Welcome to another episode of Starting Point. I'm your host, Fariza Hanif, and joining me is Kiana Wilberg. Our guest today is someone who needs no introduction. Attorney-at-Law and PPPC nominated GECOM Commissioner Sase Gunraj. Welcome, Sase.
Thank you. Good afternoon.
So, Sase, you became a household name in March 2020. The nation looked at you for guidance and for information as to what was happening at GECOM, and not just the nation, but also journalists. You became the go-to person for information as to what was happening at GECOM. But it seems as if we have to drag you out of hibernation every 5 years. What has been going on at GECOM since 2020? And what have you been doing since August 2020?
Fariza, hibernation for me suggests peace and quiet and semi-retirement or full retirement. Unfortunately, I can't say that. I've been at GECOM, and the work at GECOM has continued in earnest over the last 5 years. It's just that I don't believe the public's interest is as piqued into the operations of GECOM, but every single week, without fail almost, we meet. We deal with issues of varying kinds. One of GECOM's responsibility is registration, and as you know, that has been ongoing ever since. Outside of that role, I'm a lawyer in private practice, as you know, and that keeps me extremely busy. So there's no hibernation here. It's of course, work, and the trajectory of this administration demands that every citizen puts in their fair share of work.
Right.
And I've been doing that.
And we see the work starting already at GECOM as we head into this next election cycle. Now, a lot of decisions have been made at GECOM since you continue meeting, because you haven't stopped really. But the Tuesdays and Thursday meeting is still ongoing. And we saw recently that the opposition-nominated commissioners made some proposals and petitions and motions at these meetings. And one of them that really sparked some debate is the right of prisoners to vote. And Article 159 of the Constitution speaks about the rights of prisoners voting. So it details that those who are convicted of elections-related offenses, they can't vote, but others could. So tell me a little bit about that and what really happened at GECOM as it relates to that proposal, and what decision did GECOM make?
So, Fariza, let me disagree with you for a little bit in what Article 159 says. Article 159 provides a prohibition, but the enabling legislation, that is to say the Representation of the People Act, does not specifically set out the mechanism by which prisoners can vote, if at all. And if you look in many other jurisdictions, just next door in Trinidad, for example, there is specific legislation which allows prisoners to vote in an advanced process, similar to the way our discipline services officers and ranks vote. And as you are well aware, there is a process of intermixing, etc., to facilitate that. Our legislation is silent on that. In the United States of America, for example, some states have enabling legislation that allows prisoners to vote, and some don't. And in those states that don't, the prisoners do not vote. At the commission, an example was raised of Belize, which just had elections a few months ago. In Belize, there was a similar thrust towards allowing prisoners to vote, but that was not facilitated. That was not allowed. Of course, the excuse or the reason cited is the absence of legislation to allow that. And we have to be practical. The logistics that are required to enable prisoners to vote is not something that we could wake up one morning and put in place. It's something that requires a lot of planning. It's something that requires, like I said, legislation. And quite interestingly, the proponents of this view have been sitting at GECOM for a very, very long time. And I'd ask the question, what has been done? What have they done hitherto, outside of this crunch time of an election cycle, to facilitate that? And the answer is nothing.
Ms. Sase, let me jump in here. While the law is silent on the possibility of prisoners voting, particularly those who are not charged of elections-related offenses, there was the most recent report from the Carter Center, and I just want to read an extract of it for the benefit of our audience. And that extract says, GECOM should take steps to ensure that procedures for elections facilitate voting rights of all eligible voters, including prisoners. And it goes on to state that eligible Guyanese should not have to sacrifice their legal rights because of lack of procedures. Is it that the Carter Center did not take that particular consideration of yours into consideration? And why is it only being discussed now if this was a recommendation in 2020?
I have no doubt that the Carter Center, as we all know, is an agency which lends electoral support in many, many countries. And their experience at electoral management, electoral observation, electoral support is way wider than us at GECOM as an electoral management body for one territory, one country. That being said, and I don't want to appear as though I'm kicking the can down the road, but GECOM is an agency which is bound by statute. And the representation of the People's Act is tantamount to our handbook, statutory handbook, which says what we can do, what we can't do, all the procedures, etc. And I don't want to belabor this point, but we can't change the law. GECOM does not have the power to change the law. That is the foray of the legislature. We can only work with what was provided to us by the legislature. And I can tell you, similar recommendations have been made by the Carter Center in many, many jurisdictions. But Carter Center and the other electoral observer missions have made recommendations. Some were implemented, some were not. Changes were made to suit some, and some changes not all. So at the end of the day, I dare say we have to work with what we have.
But on the point of prisoners voting, I just want to clarify that the law only speaks to the voting rights of those who have been convicted of elections-related offenses, correct?
Right, and I will now, I will perhaps be forced to make this as facetious as it sounds, as it will sound, this facetious statement. GECOM is not preventing a prisoner from voting. At your polling station, your name will be on a list. There will be a ballot available there for you to go and vote.
So
right?
is it not the work of GECOM to put systems in place to allow the prisoners to vote?
So,
is that not GECOM's responsibility?
So let us take it this way. You are remanded to prison, or you are sentenced to a period of imprisonment a week before elections.
Right.
How does GECOM, which has already put systems in place for lists at polling stations, ballot boxes packed with sensitive and non-sensitive materials, including ballots, already there, how does one cater for you?
So can you not implement a cutoff point?
Well, if you implement a cutoff point, all well and good. Mm-hmm. But then there will be people who will still perhaps claim disenfranchisement. And so you see, it's a delicate balance. Uh-huh. And I dare say, I personally, and I believe the Commission as a whole, does not want to, we err on the side of enfranchisement in all circumstances, but there are constraints towards enabling that enfranchisement. There are limits to our ability to allow that enfranchisement.
Okay. Let's see if I can just also, on this issue, not to belabor the point as well, but the prisoner population, you're looking at over 2,000 individuals. And even if we say that 2% of that is possibly related to elections issues, quite unlikely. don't you think it behooves GECOM to, considering the size of the population, to say, okay, is there something that we can look at? Is there a way in which we can petition to have the law changed or to make procedures possible so that we can ensure that these persons are able to vote?
Guyana, I'm sure at future times from now, you will have legislators on your program, at least I hope so. And I believe at that point, that question might be better placed to them.
Okay, so the proposal was made by the opposition commissioners. What decision did GECOM take on prisoners voting, if any?
Well, the decision was a plain, perhaps, and a simple one. In the absence of legislation to enable prisoners to vote, our hands are tied. And that's a reality. That is the decision.
Okay.
Okay, so you voted on that already?
Yes, it's in my opinion, a done deal, a done matter, an
Okay.
issue resolved.
Okay. All right, so another topic I want us to discuss is the advice being provided to GECOM by the Attorney General in the absence of a legal advisor to GECOM. Do you think that's a conflict of interest, and what are your views?
Advice from the Attorney General to the Guyana Elections Commission is not a new phenomenon. Even when we had full-time legal officers in our employ, advice and guidance was sought from the chambers of the Attorney General, sometimes directly from the Attorney General on varying matters. The Attorney General is the principal legal advisor to the state. The key mover of critical legislation in the National Assembly. Sometimes you require guidance from the Attorney General and on issues, perhaps the rationale behind the implementation of certain provisions in the Act, etc. Who else are you going to get that from? We can't sit 7 people and a legal advisor or no legal advisor at GECOM and figure out what was the rationale behind certain issues. But on this issue of seeking advice from the Attorney General, I am forced to exemplify. After the 2020 elections, this would have been perhaps the 13th, 14th, 15th, around the 16th or 17th of March 2020. You'd recall there was a team that came from under the auspices of that agreement between President Granger and then opposition leader Bhar Jagdeo. And that team had come. And it was communicated to the commission that there was a request for an order to conduct the recount, which is now the infamous Order 60. That was litigated all the way to the CCJ and back. The legality, etc. It even formed, I believe, the basis of one of the elections petitions. Now, in the process of discussing and drafting that, one commissioner who is now objecting publicly, well, I don't believe, and I'll stand corrected, I don't believe there was a stringent objection from commissioners about interacting with the AG. That came external to GECOM. But in the height of that discussion, a decision was taken that the advice of the Attorney General's chambers was sought. This is after an election. This is after we saw what was happening. I myself, our then legal officer, Excellence Dazzle, and Commissioner Charles Corbin went to the AG's chambers, met with the AG, met with the drafting people, and met with new AFC candidates as part of that process. So I don't understand what the hullabaloo is now when, and I often say, not because it was then done then, mean it must be done now, but this is not without precedent. It is not.
I understand.
And in any event, any advice provided by the AG could only be to us persuasive guidance. We are not bound to accept it. And as a lawyer myself, I am always grateful for another view, if ever there is one, to consider making a decision.
So in your view, and just to be clear, this issue is really a non-issue. There is no conflict of interest at all.
Not as far as I see it. And importantly, for the avoidance of doubt, in the commission itself, there is no big issue about this. These concerns, if I can call them that, were raised outside or extraneous to the commission, not from within.
Thank you, Sase.
No,
I
just want to follow up
sure.
on that, Guyana. So we're in the election cycle. There's no legal advisor at GECOM. Don't you think it's important that you do get one? Because you don't know what's going to happen after September 1st. You don't know if GECOM is going to end up in court like we did in 2020 again. What's the plan there? Are you going to replace the person who resigned?
I haven't seen any movement in that direction, at least not yet at the commission. But I can tell you, and as recent as 2020, when those issues came up, and this is not to be uncharitable to the legal officer that was employed by us then, but the legal officer had little or no role to play in those matters. You'd recall, all of them were handled by external counsel.
Okay.
Thanks, Sase. Now, I want to return to the recommendations from the Carter Center and now more so from the CARICOM Observer Group. And one of the recommendations coming out of that report was that there be a political audit of GECOM and its successes and failings during the 2020 elections. Has this been done?
I could say no, but by the same token, I'll probably want to ask what is meant by a political audit. Let me address, hopefully quickly, the issue of observation reports.
Sure.
In 2020, we had CARICOM, OAS, Commonwealth, EU, Carter. If I'm missing any of the international observers, forgive me, but that's what I can remember off my head. And there were a number of local observers. All of those, most if not all of those international observers give reports, some very comprehensive reports in some instances, and invariably those reports contain recommendations. The EU, I believe, was a bit more, was in my opinion, the most thorough in relation to this, their report. After the elections were done, after the 5 months of, and after the president was sworn, and I think this was either late 2020 or early in 2021, the EU sent a team, a post-election team, to discuss with stakeholders all of the elements of the report, and they took into consideration the input of stakeholders, etc., their views, and those were reflected in their report. So they didn't just write a report and say, here, this is what we think. They said that these were certain parts. They provided, I believe, was a draft, and then we have them. You'd also be aware, if you're following the media, that recently we've had a needs assessment team from the UN in relation to determine what support, etc., could be provided.
Yes.
And in addition to that, there was also a team from the UN, from the EU, that came to meet with us, and in fact went through a lot of those recommendations to examine implementation, etc. And I'm happy to report I was part of that process at the commission. It was done with the entire commission. It was done with the entire team, and a lot of those recommendations that were within the purview of GECOM to implement. And I'm saying that with the intention of explaining it. As I said earlier on, GECOM is not the legislature. GECOM cannot make laws to govern itself. So, and as you're aware as well, there were a slew of amendments that were made to the Representation of the People Act and the National Registration Act to take into consideration some of those very recommendations that were outside of the power of GECOM to do. Within GECOM, I can't recall all of the areas, but I do recall at the end of that engagement thinking that several of those issues were dealt with, and happily so.
But coming back to the report, and the reason why I am stressing on this point is because the country went through a very turbulent time, perhaps the most turbulent in its electoral history. We saw a blatant attempt to rig the elections. And one would think that it would be incumbent on GECOM to look at its internal systems to see, okay, what loopholes were trying to, the persons tried to abuse, and to see, well, okay, how can we ensure that, yes, these are our successes, we were able to rescue the process, but then again, here is where we need to keep our eyes on. So it's from that sense I was asking this particular point. And if it is that there were other formats of this that, perhaps not a political audit, but other agencies that did provide support, and there are some loopholes which in your view have been closed and would not be allowed to be abused again, we'd be happy to hear those.
Guyana, anyone with even subpar vision looking into the events of 2020 could have easily said to you then, or could easily have said to you now, today, what the issues were. And what were the issues? Everyone, including the incumbents at that time, the opposition, all of the observer missions, local and international, said that elections day events and were optimal and were conducted.
Yes.
You recall that in a free and fair manner.
Incident free.
You can recall that.
Yes, absolutely.
Where the issue arose, the issue arose at the feet of one man, clearly aided and abetted by interested players, to subvert the will of the electorate. And that person is Claremont Mingo, and I make absolutely no apologies for saying so. And what did he do? There is a procedure that is elaborately detailed in law, which law I just I spoke about on several occasions during this engagement. And that law is, it's so comprehensive. It speaks step by step what needs to be done. And clearly, one single man made a feeble attempt to disregard the provisions of that Representation of the People Act. And it dovetailed from there. How do we, respectfully, I don't believe an audit or an examination needs to be conducted to discern that. The world saw that. The world saw that. What was done to militate against the effects of that. There's a slew of legislation, amendments that were passed to the Representation of the People Act to ensure that some of those those loopholes are closed. There are very extreme penalties that are now part of the law. In the event that person or persons seek to violate the tenets of that legislation. So, respectfully, I believe that tangible steps have been taken. Tangible steps have been taken to ensure that there isn't a repeat of that. But a person must be extremely brazen, perhaps even more brazen than they were in 2020, to risk that or to attempt that again.
Yeah, and speaking about Mingo, it now has me thinking about the trauma that we all went through when a spreadsheet was being used to tally the votes instead of the statements of poll. I mean, that's acting clearly outside of what the law stipulates. And then we have Mr. Lowenfield and all of the others who participated in that electoral fraud. But Sase, I really want to know, 5 years after, where are they now? What are they doing? They have been charged, but has justice been served?
Well, again, GECOM doesn't control
but from your personal
the judiciary.
From your personal view, I mean, are you satisfied with where this case is at? The trial is still ongoing. Or as an individual who lived through that time, and who fought for the real and true results to be declared. Are you really satisfied with where this trial is at?
And to add to Fariza's point, we're heading into a next electoral cycle. We're
yeah.
already in the next electoral cycle.
I want to preface my answer to say that what I'm about to say is not meant to be an attack on the judiciary.
Okay.
A judiciary which, of course, I have to relate to on a regular basis. But clearly, the judicial system and the sloth has manifested in such a way to demonstrate to this country and perhaps the world the speed at which that works. And I don't, outside of saying that, I don't want to get into the granular of commenting on some of the specific reasons for the delay in the hearing. But there were clearly some inexcusable delays. But the very constitution that we hold as our shelter guarantees litigants, including persons criminally charged, the protection of the law, and their utilization of it, I believe, is part of the process as well.
All right. So I want to talk now about Mr. Vincent Alexander's views on the timeline provided by GECOM to hold elections. When the president announced September 1st, the first thing that the opposition nominated commissioners said was, you know, we're not ready, GECOM is not ready. And now we have a different view. But tell me a little bit about what took place there, and can we talk more about GECOM's timeline, and are you indeed ready?
So I'll start with your last question first. I've said repeatedly in the media over the last perhaps 2-3 weeks that GECOM is ready. In fact, before I had even seen a timeline, because of my knowledge of the tasks and the burden time to execute those tasks, I was very comfortable and confident that 90 days is sufficient. Several aspects, again, of that very constitution speaks to holding elections in 90 days. It contemplates the processes must be ready within that 90-day period. 90 days after the dissolution of parliament, 90 days after a no confidence motion successfully passed. So the very constitution which governs the holding of elections caters for that. Now, that statement made by the 3 opposition nominated commissioners about the readiness or otherwise of GECOM was made prior to even seeing a work plan. You'd recall the president made the announcement on Sunday evening. On Monday was a holiday. The meeting was set for Tuesday at 1 o'clock, and at 10 o'clock on Tuesday morning, the 3 opposition nominated commissioners held a meeting, a press engagement. Yeah. At which point they said that GECOM could not be ready. Right? It was perhaps in my mind preemptively suggesting GECOM's unreadiness. Later at that meeting, the chief elections officer presented a work plan to us, which clearly defined the Secretariat's ability to execute the processes that are necessary for a successful holding of an election within the statutory approved guidelines and timelines, and showed that an election could be held on September 1st, as was announced by the president. And of course, one, let me state clearly, it is the president's prerogative to name an election date and no other person, guaranteed again by that constitution. And two, the president stated the basis of his advice, and then the chairman clarified, I believe in a release to the press, the basis upon which that advice was given. So, and now that timeline has been approved. That timeline is being executed, and thankfully so far I'm happy to report that without hiccups, it's successfully being implemented.
Right, and when that didn't work, that delay tactic, I would say, when that didn't work, there was this view and opinion that the president acted out of protocol in naming a date for elections. There was this view that all of the commissioners were blindsided by it. Is that so? Did the president act out of protocol, or did he not follow protocol rather in naming a date?
I don't know, Frieza, what protocol is being referred to. The president sought and obtained the advice of the chairman. As I said in my previous answer to my answer to your previous question, 90 days is contemplated throughout the Constitution, at several areas of the Constitution, several provisions of the Constitution. I don't believe, but to answer...
Were you blindsided?
My blindsiding or otherwise doesn't matter for the purposes of this interview. You blindsided me by that question and put me off topic. But the opposition commissioners, as we have seen, this is the second electoral cycle, that they have used all kinds of excuses or proffered all kinds of excuses against holding of elections. Recall a no confidence motion was passed on the 21st of December 2018. That those elections were held on the 2nd of March 2020, about how long after? A year?
2 years.
And something after. And once again, we are seeing a repeat of that posture from those commissioners. And which posture is being manifested in many ways, up to and including walking out from the meeting.
Meetings, right. See a lot of those.
Sase, I want to switch gears now to oversight of the upcoming elections. And we've seen that over the years, the elections that we've had, observer groups have played a very important role in giving us that stamp of authority and saying that all has been done in a free and fair manner. Now, this time around, we are expected to have observer groups again. I want you to talk a bit about their importance to the process because, again, recently Mr. Alexander claimed that observers have no actual power and it would be impossible, it would be impractical to think that they can hopscotch across 3,000 thereabout polling stations. So kindly share your views on that particular perspective.
Guyana, observers, both local and international, are but one aspect of the oversight. And I'll get to another aspect in a quick moment. I myself have seen electoral observations from two aspects. One, seeing electoral observer groups coming here to observe our elections. And I myself have served, like Commissioner Alexander, in fact, the first electoral observation mission that I was a part of, Commissioner Alexander was on that mission with me. And I sure don't think that he thought of it as a waste of time then. Now, that being said, observers do not only observe the polling day activities. Observers have a wide latitude to observe pre-election activity, post-election activity, post-election day activity, which includes the tabulation, final declaration of results, etc. All of those aspects. And while the observer groups may not be able to place an observer in every single station, in 2020 we had 2,399 stations. I believe there is a greater number of stations likely this year. While observers, you may not be able to put an observer in every station. What you do have is a mechanism for contesting political parties to put a polling agent in every polling station. And outside of that, or included with that, now the legislation has changed to cater for an alternate polling agent. So in the event that your assigned polling agent is for some reason unable to perform those functions for all or part of the day, you have an alternate on whom you can rely. And unlike the observers, those polling agents are, for want of a better expression, your own people, people who you ought to trust and place in those positions. Persons who sit there from gong to gong, from the pre-opening, in fact, even before polls are open. Your observers, your polling agents are allowed to oversee the packing of the box that goes to their station. They are there before the opening of poll. When that box arrives at the polling station, sealed, the polling agent is at liberty to be there, all the way to the posting of the statement of poll outside of the polling station in a prominent place or conspicuous place as the law provides. And that polling agent is entitled to a copy, a certified copy of that statement of poll, which is the official result of that polling station. So outside of that, candidates to the poll, agents of the party, etc., are allowed to observe the processes at every part. In short, observers, whether again local or international, are just another layer. And like I said earlier on in relation to the Carter Center, they bring a different pair of eyes, a different set of eyes, different collection of expertise to the process with which they observe the process.
But you would deem them an important part of the process.
I do. In fact, historically, Trinidad and Tobago did not invite, at least for 2 elections as far as I'm aware, did not invite electoral observers. And the last elections, well, just shy of a month and a week ago, I don't know, I don't want to attribute it to public pressure or what, but observers were allowed as part of the process, invited by the government. And mind you, for what it's worth, observers are invited by the government of the day and have to be approved by the government of the day to be part of the process. They have to be accredited. There's a specific piece of legislation that allows diplomatic immunity of sorts to elections observers. And I believe I saw quoted in the press yesterday or earlier this week, the Attorney General saying that the government welcomes observers of every kind.
Correct.
Of every kind.
Now, Sase, we're in this election cycle already, and the feeling on the ground is that is 2020 going to repeat itself? A lot of people are scared, nervous, and some of us are still healing from the trauma that we went through, yourself included. What reassurance can you give at this point in time?
First, as I mentioned before, I have a lot of confidence in the legislative changes that were made. For example, District 4, which was the epicenter of the issues on the last occasion, is now broken into 4 sub-districts. The East Bank, the East Coast, North and South Georgetown. That way, that tabulation is done in smaller bites. And for the other larger regions as well, quarantine is divided into 3, well, not quarantine, Region 6. District 6 is divided into 3 areas. District 6. District 6, referring to Berbice. District 3 has been divided into 3 areas, I believe, as well. And that makes it less likely for a person with malintent to execute something of that nature again. But you know what? One of the things that came out of the last elections, I believe with all of the litigation that led up to the election, recall the plethora of litigation after the no confidence motion, the litigation in relation to the GECOM chair, after that's the two groups that I recall offhand. After elections, there was also the issue of the residency case that came up before elections. Post-elections, you had the issue of all of those matters that came up, the one challenging Order 60, the one post the recount, all of those matters. What that did was to make the citizens, people who perhaps in a normal setting would be disinterested in that operation. It made the citizens acutely aware of some of the intricacies that are associated with the execution of an electoral process. And in my mind, the benefit that accrues to the nation as a consequence is that the policing will be done. The policing will be done by those very citizens, those very electors, who, in my view, are the largest stakeholder in the electoral process. So that is a major plus for me to see that the citizens themselves, when they, and you know, we have a part of our work called civic and voter education, where critical aspects and lots of other aspects as well of the electoral process are information about it is disseminated through the mass media, targeted media, etc. I have seen the feedback from the ground. People are hearkening in to those announcements, and they are more interested. So you can now look forward to seeing someone going into a polling station more enlightened, and that, I believe, is a great plus for our nation.
Sase, I want to thank you so much for your contributions to today's episode. It has been truly enlightening. I know that our audience has learned quite a lot about the electoral process and some of the key decisions being made at GECOM. So we want to thank you so much for participating and sharing your perspectives as well.
It was my pleasure. Thank you for having me.
To our audience, thank you as well for tuning in. Be sure to follow us next week, same time, same place. This has been Starting Point.
Thanks for watching Starting Point. Follow us on Spotify, YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn for critical updates and exclusive content.